We are in a truly sacred season, and it is filled with wonder, intrigue, conflict, festive lights. Some of us wait all year for this, right? Some of us are planning for it. Some of us are buying supplies to best enjoy it. We are often gathering friends and family together to enjoy it. And of course, I am speaking of the Christmas Hallmark season. Yes, those Hallmark Christmas movies are near and dear to many of your hearts, I know, because who could really resist that small town widower who has 8 children, who woos the big city lawyer who has come to crush his little business of a Christmas tree farm, and yet she falls deeply in love with him, willing to give up her ambition and her 401k in order to save his family industry from the big corporate developers who have paid her paycheck the entire time. And of course, they always fall in love. There is usually a Christmas Eve proposal, and they live happily ever after. Unless you are more of the subset within the Hallmark Christmas movie theme that falls into the secret royalty, I never knew there were so many royals out there until Hallmark showed me the truth. So whatever your flavor of Hallmark joy, these stories definitely paint a unique picture of Christmas. And I know that many of us enjoy them, and that there is a whole lot of romance and love wrapped up with a wee bit of conflict that's always wrapped up in 90 minutes or less. Now, I know there are some of you out there who are not believers. And you Grinches, you can have your own fun. To all of us, we have our vices. And I know that many of these movies hit those nerves within us of nostalgia or just wanting to have a feel-good moment. You know, many of us engage in not Hallmark movies, but it may be Christmas Vacation. It may be A Christmas Story or A Wonderful Life. And it plays on our desire for familiarity, for consistency, for a little escapism. I mean, these can be very kind of just relaxing experiences for us. And it's good fun. And I don't want to diminish the fun that we can have with them. But sometimes it can mess with our understanding of what Christmas is, who Christmas is about, and particularly when we look at, kind of those Hallmark Christmas movies, what love is about. Now, I love the traditions of this season. The cookie baking, the decorating, the visiting with family and friends, the concerts that we go to. These are all enjoyable experiences in addition to those movies that we love. But I think as followers of Christ, followers of Jesus, we see these traditions as bonus, as fun on top of the message, as things that are meant to bring us joy and sometimes even slow us down a little bit so that we can better connect with the essence that is Christmas, which is really to remind us of God's great love for us as he chose to be born to let's be honest, a teen mom, where outsiders, or foreigners, if you will, from the East, are some of the first to recognize who he is, that he is first announced to field workers, who then visit a newborn king in a very poor neighborhood. We sometimes allow the festive modern traditions to overshadow the heart of the story that gives us truth and life. And I think it's more about perspective than it is about disdaining or getting rid of some of our modern enjoyment of this holiday. I want us to take joy. I want us to have some silly fun because I believe that God has created us with those desires in us. In fact, I love this quote that came off of Twitter about Hallmark Christmas movies. Let me read it for you. Does every Hallmark Christmas movie have the same plot? Yes. Am I still going to watch them and act surprised when Susan falls in love with the small-town baker who only wears sweaters instead of falling for the big city CEO? Yes. There is something beautiful about that. And we enjoy happy endings. We want to know that we have those coming for us. But we also are realists who know that love stories have conflict and that they are not wrapped up in 90 minutes or less with a guaranteed happy ending. And I think some of our unease at times in life is the fact that we understand there's a disconnect with what's going on the screen versus real life. That what we are experiencing doesn't line up with that. And I think a lot of us are very capable of discerning through that. But when all we do is take that in, it starts to shape our worldview and our expectations of ourselves, our lives, and others. And that then becomes very disconnecting. And it sometimes drives us more to fantasy and unrealistic expectations of what even, maybe not even love, but how the holiday should feel. That it should feel magical and beautiful because it has all of these elements to it. It can still be magical and beautiful without all of these elements in it. Because at the heart of it is a God who loves us and pursues us deeply. So everything else on top becomes icing. And who doesn't like icing? So I wonder sometimes if we create these unrealistic expectations that can either force us to live in fantasy or generate within us some really hard bitterness. See, when our expectations do line up with reality, we find purpose and fulfillment. Because one of the most disappointing things in life are unmet expectations. But when we can reshape our expectations of Christmas and love and joy and peace to what we will experience through God, they will line up. And with that comes peace. See, when we do that, we realize that love is not something that just happens to you as you're walking down the street of that small town. But love is an action. Love is a choice that we make. And it's a choice that we make every day. And much like hope, peace, and joy that we've already talked about, it's less about emotions and more about mindset. Less about what my gut or maybe my heart is telling me. Because sometimes it's just indigestion. See, when we lean more on it as a mindset, we lean more into trusting in God's love and God's definition of love, an understanding of what love truly is. And as people who follow Jesus, I think we can take a cue from our spiritual ancestors, Jesus' disciples, those individuals who walked closely with Jesus, defined love through the person of Christ. They looked at Jesus in his words, his teachings, his actions to define what love is. And when Jesus himself is asked, interestingly enough, what is the greatest commandment? He's not asked for a definition of love. He's asked what's the greatest commandment. He actually talks about love. And it's recorded in Matthew chapter 22, verses 37 through 40. Let me read it for us today. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Now remember, Jesus was asked a question about what's the greatest law? What's the most important one? And he actually quotes from the Old Testament. He quotes from a prayer called the Shema, an ancient Jewish prayer that was found in Deuteronomy. And he lists it as the first and greatest commandment. And then he follows it up with a second piece that comes to us from Leviticus, also found in the Old Testament. And Jesus here is drawing on his Jewish roots and quoting from the Old Testament, which really can be summarized here as love God and love neighbor. It's that simple, Jesus says. Everything rests on this. This is the foundation. And it gives two directions for our love to go: toward God and towards others. And when we think about this, it's really two sides of the same coin. So we have Jesus' words on love as an answer to a question about the law, which is interesting to think that love guides our relationship with God, which is really what the law was to do. It wasn't about control so much as a guide to how to experience God. And Jesus is telling us that the very basis of all that is love. Love should be the direction for all of that. And as we look to Jesus and his life, his death, his resurrection, it shows us what love looks like in the flesh and in words. See, we need words. We need the loving words, but we need them to be coupled with deeds, don't we? We need to, one, know that what is said is real because it's displayed in action. But we also sometimes need those actions to define those words for us. What does it look like? How do I experience this? So as we look to Jesus' actions throughout the Gospels, we see something that happens again and again. One, Jesus is known for loving the unlovable. He sought out those his society said were unworthy of love. People who were unclean, people who didn't have the right job, people who came from the wrong side of the tracks. Those were Jesus' peeps. Those were the individuals he sought out and spent time with, the ones he welcomed in. He said, make room for them. When everybody was said, keep them out. Jesus says, come sit with me. See, he doesn't just simply hand them a $5 bill as he walks down the street. He picks them up and invites them to dinner. He has a meal with them. He engages in relationship with them. He didn't treat them like projects who needed to get fixed up. He actually treated them like people worthy of love, and in that, their lives were changed. He treated them like they were people worthy of the attention of God. And in this, Jesus shows that love is selfless. That when we choose the well-being of someone, we choose their good without expecting anything in return. That is how Jesus helps us define love. And even when we see Jesus angry, and we see him angry, especially in this episode that we read about and where he's in the temple, and he's overturning tables, and he's chasing people out, and he's angry. But he's not angry because somebody offended him or insulted him. He's offended because these actions are keeping people from God. He is seeking the good of another. And Jesus will also show us what it is to love generously. That he will talk to his disciples of what love looks like every day. And part of that is recorded in Matthew chapter 5, verses 43 to 48, when Jesus will tell his disciples to love your enemy. Let me read this for us. You have heard it said that love your enemy, love your neighbor. You have heard it said that love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Do not even the pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. And in this instance, perfection is about the fullest possible love of another. It's not the psychological perfection we put on, ourselves, but about being perfect in love. See, Jesus recognizes that it is easy. It is easy to love people we like. That's why we love them. I love hanging out with you. You're so fun. Oh my gosh. I just love them. Aren't they so fun? Yeah. It's hard to love people we don't like. It's really hard to love that lazy, incompetent coworker who's always throwing you under the bus, who makes more work for you. They're hard to love, aren't they? It's hard to love that family member, or at least even smile at them, who's always criticizing your weight, your job, your hair, your dress. Those people are hard to love, aren't they? It's hard to love people with whom you disagree with on political issues that have a radical impact on you and the people that you love. It's hard to love those people. Jesus recognizes that it's difficult to love people we don't like, people that we disagree with, people that we may not categorize as enemy, but we treat as such, as somebody that we want nothing to do with. Jesus recognizes how hard that is and then shows us how it's done. Jesus loved and loves the forgotten people. And he died for the selfishness of his enemies, willingly. Real love, true love, as Jesus demonstrated, is unconditional. It's not reliant on if we like that person or not. It's unconditional, meaning we have done nothing to earn or keep it. Somebody else has done nothing to earn or keep our love. And the thing is, love like this makes us vulnerable, makes us open to rejection, open to hurt. And a lot of us avoid love. Maybe not avoid love, but we really limit our love to prevent ourselves from getting hurt. And yet Jesus shows us what it is to love, meaning we risk it all. We put it out there. We put it all on the line. We love generously. We love unconditionally. We love selflessly. And we do this because God has already done it. See, God risks it all in his love for us. He risks our rejection. He risks our rejection every day. And he still chooses us, still chooses to humble himself for our sake, humbles himself to love us best. That we see this love on display even from the very beginning of Jesus' life in a little town called Bethlehem. One of the most vulnerable creatures in this world is a baby. They are utterly dependent on others to survive. And God chooses this form to come to earth to save us. He puts himself in our hands. I don't know what is more vulnerable. This is the depths of the love that God has for us. And this is why every year we revisit these stories to remind ourselves in all circumstances that we are loved with an unshakable love, an unmeasurable love. The God of the universe enters life, the messiness of it all, with us, to be with us, to save us. He does this as a baby in the most humble of circumstances. And we, as his followers, are invited to love like he does. Selflessly, sacrificially, without conditions. And the fun thing is, when we love like this, we actually create more goodness in this world. That at the very beginning of creation, what God did was declared good. And when we love, we actually have the opportunity to create more goodness in this world. That when we seek the good of others, we create, like God, more good in this world. We are invited to love like God with our heart, soul, mind, all of it, all of our strength. And the fun thing is that this all-encompassing love can't help but spill over onto others. Many of you chose to love strangers this season by buying Christmas gifts for kids in foster care. As a church, we took on 27 kids. They had about 40 on their list. They gave us 27. You will probably never meet these children who are celebrating Christmas, some of them for the very first time, and not because of their age. Who are celebrating it apart from their birth family and yet are celebrating with strangers who are trying to love them well. And you got to be a part of how others are trying to love those children well. And the thing is, not only did you love those children, but it spilled over onto those of us who delivered those gifts to the Village Network. We saw how generously you loved strangers, and we couldn't help but be overwhelmed as we packed up those packages in Kevin's truck on Monday. The goodness that you showed them spilled over not only to us then, but also to the social workers who helped us unload when we dropped them off. And as we spent some time talking to them, they shared with us that this is one of the things that they look forward to most every year. It is such a joy to them. And they hold on to the memory of it throughout the year because their work is hard. They see what happens to these children. They see why these children need to be removed from their homes, and their heart breaks every day for these children. And so then to see others, complete strangers, love on these kids is a joy to them. And so your love created more goodness in that moment. You gave hope not only to the children, but to the individuals who are trying to care for those children the best that they can. Love is contagious in all the best ways. And love is more than an emotion. It is a choice. And it is a choice we have an opportunity to make every day. And I think this is what Augustine, who was a theologian centuries and centuries ago, meant when he said, love God and do as he did. Love God and do as he did. So how do we know how to love? Is we do it because we watch what Jesus did. We look to Jesus. We look to his life, his ministry, his resurrection. We say, this is how we love. Now, I know Jesus can feel like a tough act to follow sometimes. And sometimes it's hard to figure out, in this situation, how would I love like Jesus? So sometimes we need to look to others to help understand how to follow Jesus in that love. And we sometimes look to the ones who are following Jesus closely. And as we are in the season of Advent, when we revisit the story of Jesus' birth and we revisit the individuals who played a part in his life, two that I always love to look to are those who raised Jesus to know how to love. And I think about the story of Mary and Joseph and how they responded to God's call to love, how they trusted God's plan even when it was hard, and probably even a little confusing, because they didn't have all the answers. We look back, we know the answers. We know how the story played out. They did not, but they trusted that God did. We see this in a young woman, Mary, who was probably 14 or 15 when the angel came to her. I didn't have this wisdom when I was 14 or 15. But when the angel comes to her and tells her she's going to become a mother, she's a little confused about how, but she says yes to God's plan in the midst of her uncertainty, because she trusts in God's love for her. Because she has experienced God's all-consuming love, she knows that she can follow that path of love herself. And then there is Joseph, her fiancé, who is an honorable, compassionate, righteous man that we read about in Scripture, meaning he will not live a lie. That when he finds out that Mary, yes, is pregnant, he knows that baby ain't his. He has some choices. He could live a lie, claim the child as his, or he can expose Mary, which could mean potential violence for her as a woman who committed, in the eyes of their culture, adultery. Or what Joseph originally chooses as his plan is to put her aside quietly, meaning he'll quietly end their engagement so that Mary will not have to suffer violence and he will not have to live a lie. But those of us who know this story that know that Joseph will be visited by an angel who will tell him God's plan for Mary and this baby and how Joseph can be a part of that story if he chooses. He chooses to trust God's plan for his life and his family's well-being. And Joseph will embrace Jesus as his own, raising this child as his own, declaring him fully God's son, and yet saying, this child is mine to raise, mine to love, mine to coach into manhood. And I think Joseph is the definition of biblical manhood we really need in the church these days. A man of conviction who allows compassion and faithfulness to guide him, even when it brings him suffering and possible humiliation in the short term. And I think about Joseph because while Mary will witness the resurrection as well as Jesus' ministry and life, Joseph most likely died before Jesus' ministry. Joseph died trusting in his love for God and God's love for him. To the very end, Joseph allowed God's love to lead him. So when we are unsure how to love well, how to love like Jesus, I think we can look to Mary and Joseph, who both allowed love to lead them in their big decisions and their everyday decisions. See, witnessing love like this it's very different from that Hallmark movie, Love. which is sometimes very flat and wrapped up neatly and tidily. See, this kind of love demands more because it gives more. It's richer, it's sturdier, it perseveres, it weathers the storms of life and celebrates the joy of it as well. Because it is grounded in God, who is eternal, whose love for us is perfect. The one who loves us truly and fully is not that beautiful widowed tree farmer or the secret princess from a fake country. No, the one who loves us truly and fully is God, because he is without flaw. And when we trust in that love first and foremost, when we allow that to lay the foundation of our life, we can love others more fully. We can love selflessly, sacrificially, and unconditionally every day because we trust his love to fill in the gaps when we fall short. Amen. Amen.